Hi Saints, in this quick installment video to our War Rapture videos, we are now going to examine a connection between the country of Turkey, Erdogan, and his recent proposal for Sweden's bid into NATO. Why are we going to cover this, you might ask? Well, fascinatingly enough, the very day that this happened, a celestial sign occurred which proves war is tied with the constellation of Leo, as it once did for the start of World War I and World War II. In fact, one of the more profound aspects is that we will see a direct connection to the Revelation 12 sign, and why that is connected to the war rapture. This video will be an interesting one in order to demonstrate that God uses celestial signs in a pattern format, and hopefully for a paradigm shift in our thinking about how God uses celestial signs, but ultimately to point how close we are to the soon war rapture of the church, the bride of Christ. And so with that said, welcome back to Supernatural by Design. My name is Jared. Thank you for joining me today. I pray that you've been having a wonderful and blessed week, and that God's grace and peace is with you. And not just any kind of worldly peace, nope, but only a supernatural peace that Jesus Christ himself can give us. It's why we're supernatural by design. And before we begin today's topic, if you can do me a huge favor, if you want to support this channel, hit the like button, share this video, comment on this video, tell me where you're from. Or if you really want to be a maverick, subscribe to this channel. And so with that being said, I just want to thank you for all your continued support, your prayers, and your patience. Yes, your patience. I apologize for being late on these videos. I'm trying to change some things up so I can get more content out more frequently. So please stay tuned. And now, let's begin, because Saints, this topic is incredible. Check this out. First, we'll cover some Bible passages that pertain to this topic, as it's always important to cover your topic with a biblical foundation first. And then secondly, we will discuss and recap the Leo war pattern, because A, it will serve as the setup for part 3 of this video and the conclusion, but also we will discuss the Revelation 12 sign and how it pertains to it. And then thirdly and finally, the most exciting part of this video, we will take what we have learned so far, add in our World War II repeating celestial signs, and demonstrate that there is a continuing celestial pattern tied to Leo and war escalation, and in particular to one unique leader, Erdogan of Turkey. But you're going to have to wait to the end of the video to see that, because God's celestial signs demonstrate that we are knocking on the door of the war rapture. And because these celestial signs follow a pattern, we can demonstrate that these celestial signs go hand in hand with Bible prophecy. And that, Saints, is supernatural by design. And so we have these 3 sections to go over. So let's begin part 1 and lay out some introductory stuff plus our biblical foundation. First off, this video is a conglomerate of at least 3 videos. And in order to save some time on relaying all the foundation, please watch these 3: Signs of Repeating, Pergamum Rising or the Pergamum Eclipse, and War is Coming. If you watch those 3, they will provide the foundation for today's video. Secondly, this video is not part 2 of the War is Coming video. I'm still working on that. However, because this was such a big event with Turkey's proposal for Sweden to join NATO and its celestial connection to Leo, I had to get this out there. However, still very relevant to the War is Coming video. But anyways, watch those 3 videos. I'll leave a link in the description below. Thirdly and finally, let's provide some biblical foundations for this topic, God's celestial signs, and specifically in the end times. So our first verse is Genesis chapter 1:14. God created the sun and the moon and the stars for signs, seasons, days, and years. And in that order, understandably, that the sun, moon, and stars' primary function, their first purpose, is for signs. Not just end time signs, not just the birth of Christ signs, but at all times they are used for signs. The key component in understanding what these signs mean is the patterns that they fall in. Which brings me to slide number 2 and Bible verse number 2. Luke chapter 21, verse 25. That there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress among the nations. So this is two-part here. One, we know that there are celestial signs in the end times. In fact, that they are tied to distress among the nations. And it's that aspect that is the underlying foundation for these videos. We are seeing these signs, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, the aurora borealis. All of these are signs, but moreover, that they're tied to world events. And in addition, the Greek word for stars also means constellations, and this is why Leo is significant for this particular series. Now, as stated earlier, it's the patterns aspect of celestial signs that help us to define what they mean, which is why on this slide you see 3 different types: sorrow cycle, convergence, and repeating sequence. And relevant for today's video, the repeating sequence pattern, let's turn to this slide. As an example, and a part of today's topic, we can have a series of celestial events leading up to a world event of a particular type. When we see that particular celestial sequence, again, we have a pretty good understanding about the world event type that is to follow. And so, for example, our World War III hybrid eclipse slide is an example of that, as everything on the left are the celestial signs leading up to World War II, and on the right are all the celestial signs repeating again, which is why we're arguing World War III is on the horizon. And so we have our celestial repeating sequence, world event, again repeating celestial sequence, similar world event type. But moreover, and in conclusion for part 1, Genesis chapter 1:14 and Luke 21 verse 25 are our foundational verses for the series, but not limited to. But aside from that, celestial signs and the fact that they follow patterns, God is very precise in his accuracy and precision and frequency, considering that he set all these celestial signs in motion before the fall of man. Let that sink in, because it proves Isaiah 46:10. God declared the end from the beginning. Now, as that is part 1, which was supposed to be a quick introductory section, I apologize, I just keep talking. Let's go ahead and go on to part 2, and now look at the war pattern celestial signs, in order to set up for the significance of Erdogan and NATO, which this part will definitely be quicker, because it's all a part of those 3 videos that you need to watch. But nonetheless, we're going to have 3 slides we're going to take a look at here. We've already seen 1. Well, actually, we've already seen the first 2, but we have 3 to take a look at. Here is the World War III hybrid eclipse, celestial pattern. And so let's cover a few details, the first one of which, the Antichrist hybrid solar eclipse on 4/20 just occurred. As this was a huge celestial sign, pointing to the fact that the Antichrist is getting ready to come on the scene. I can't stress that enough, as the way that we know that is it's tied to HAMAN, because it occurred in the constellation of Pisces. And according to Jewish tradition, and you can actually verify it in Stellarium as well, the month of Adar occurred when the sun was in Pisces. Check out the story of Esther, check out Haman, you will see it follows the archetype of the Antichrist in the end times. In fact, let us just stay here for a moment, because Haman and the story of Esther, the whole entire 2023 celestial season is pointing to that book of prophecy. In fact, turning to this slide, as just a quick preview, we don't get too rabbit hole down another theme here, but we will discover that the story of Ruth, Boaz, Ruth, and Naomi, well, because that story takes place in Bethlehem, it's a prophecy foreshadow of Christ's first coming, not his second. However, very relevant here in just a second. But it's a story of Esther that's a story about the end times. You see, King Ahasuerus' nickname was the Lion King, and we know that when Jesus returns, he comes as the lion from the tribe of Judah. Interesting. Queen Esther, well, symbolic of the raptured bride of Christ, who gets to rule and reign with Jesus Christ. Ruth uniquely doesn't carry that distinction. Well, how about Mordecai? Well, he is a foreshadow of King David, because both Mordecai and King David are placed in second in command over the land, just as King David is during the millennial reign of Christ, found in Ezekiel 34 and Ezekiel 37. However, where these two stories come together, from Ruth and Esther, and even tie in our Venus and Leo connection, anyone want to take a guess? The Revelation 12 sign. You know, the woman that's clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, and crowned with 12 stars. You see, I used to be on one side or the other. There are two arguments what this sign represents. And one reason why I haven't discussed it a lot is because I was on one side. As the two sides are that the Revelation 12 sign is necessarily just talking about Christ's first coming. And the other side is that the Revelation 12 sign is talking about the rapture of the bride of Christ. However, the Holy Spirit has beautifully pieced this together. Well, it turns out it's both. And when I mean both, I'm referring to the story of Ruth and the story of Esther. And how do we know that? Revelation 5:5 again. The lion from the tribe of Judah, that's our Esther story. The root of David is our Ruth story, as Boaz is the grandfather of David. And so this celestial sign has a double prophecy. And we are in the latter end of that prophecy, its connection to the story of Esther. And again, we'll definitely go into more depth about this in part 3, so definitely check that out when it comes out. But what I want to turn your attention to, and how it relates to this video, is that if we zoom into Leo, look where Venus is at. It's in Leo. Oh, the profound implications of that very detail. That's supernatural by design. Again, tying this all back to a war rapture. Isn't that incredible? The Revelation 12 sign contains within it the war rapture pattern. Venus inside of Leo. Okay, now check this out. Check this out. We have the Revelation 12 sign dealing with Virgo and the constellation of Leo. Saints, you're not going to believe this, but check this out. Turning to Stellarium on the October 14th annular eclipse, as Venus is in Leo, with our eclipse in Virgo. And so, our solar eclipse is a reference to the Revelation 12 sign. And Venus being in the constellation of Leo is our war rapture sign. And so, again, the October 14th eclipse is tied to the Revelation 12 sign. In fact, I would argue it's one of the reasons why the month of October is extremely significant. Now, taking the Esther side of the Revelation 12 sign through this annular eclipse, one more final detail that is profound is that this annular eclipse, this wedding ring eclipse, a wedding ring, what hand do you wear that on? The left hand. Isn't it fascinating? The placement, God's precision in this wedding ring eclipse. It's on the wedding hand of Virgo. Oh, that's exciting, saints. Saints, we are almost out of here. Especially considering we're seeing the story of Esther played out in God's handiwork through his celestial signs. That's incredible, saints. Now, let's talk about Haman real quick in the story of Esther. Because what's different and unique from the story of Ruth is there is no bad guy. There is no bad guy. That's another way that we know that the story of Ruth is not talking about the second coming or the rapture. The story of Esther is. Because Haman is an archetype of the Antichrist. As Haman has 10 sons, the Antichrist will rule with 10 kings. What's interesting is the blood connection that's being made in the story of Esther. It begs the question, do these 10 kings become blood related to the Antichrist through the mark of the beast? Therefore, no longer human. Buying and selling aside, that's just cryptocurrency. That's just a forcing function. I would contend the mark of the beast does something to your DNA. Because we see this blood relationship between Haman and his 10 sons. Haman is also given his authority, just like the 10 kings give their authority to the Antichrist. And there are many other tie-ins we could go through, but my main point is to highlight the significance of the 420 hybrid eclipse as it relates to Haman, because Haman is an archetype of the Antichrist, just as Hitler was an archetype of the Antichrist, and why this hybrid eclipse relates the two. So let's pick up where we left off on that topic. And so highlighting the next detail about that hybrid eclipse is the fact that 420 was Hitler's 134th birthday, and a part of that sorrow cycle 129. So following that 18-year pattern backwards, remembering the sorrow cycles, 18 years, every 18 years, just like this here. Well, anyways, it occurred the very same year Hitler came to power in 1933. So they're both marked with 129. That's the sorrow cycle associated with it. But we also have this birthday connection to Hitler. So zooming into Erdogan, that's why the 2/26/2017 annular eclipse is significant, because it marked his 63rd birthday. And even zooming out, that's why these two world leaders are very significant. And for our times, Erdogan. And so to that point, the country of Germany was responsible for the start of World War I and World War II. However, it would appear, and where I've changed at, because of Erdogan's proposal for Sweden to be a part of NATO, maybe what God has been pointing to all along is that Erdogan is responsible for the start of World War III, with Germany playing a lesser role, kind of a handing off of the baton, you could say, but tied under our Pergamum connection. But maybe more accurately, it would be to say that Erdogan of Turkey, which I think is actually how his name is pronounced, not Erdogan, so I apologize, but Erdogan of Turkey, that he plays a huge role in the start of World War III. And so in section 3, we'll see another celestial confirmation of why that potentially is the case. And I say potentially because we need to be sensitive of 3 other major players tied to this war connection. Because admittedly, Belarus is also significant for this war development, as an extension or part of Russia, as that was a revelation made by the Holy Spirit from the movie World War Z, which put forth in this video here prior to nukes being talked about in Belarus, to nukes actually moving to Belarus, and before the Wagner Group moved to Belarus. So things are escalating in Belarus. Remembering that the Holy Spirit gleaned that information for me because of the scene that takes place in Jerusalem. Also, a third potential candidate would be the fact that the hybrid eclipse on 420 is connected to Haman. Therefore, there's a connection between Iran and Israel. In fact, it may be the case that all 3 tracks, Turkey, Belarus, which would be part of our Russia connection, and Iran, are moving to a single climatic point at the moment of the war rapture. In fact, when we get to some of the celestial sign dates later in the video, that something in the news headlines will occur involving one of these 3 countries, Turkey, Belarus or Russia, and Iran, as a point of escalation. So just keep that in the back of your mind when we get there. And also, just as a point of clarification, because I know I'm throwing a lot of dates out there, and I'm not trying to rapture date set, but nonetheless, whenever I mention these dates, it's 2 points of escalation, significant points of escalation that we would see in the news, or a date tied to a contributing factor towards our war rapture. However, and differentiating between that is that the war rapture, as we've seen in the war rapture video, a celestial sign that marked the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, which would be sudden destruction. And that's what the Apostle Paul even tells us. And so just want to make that distinction as we talk about these dates. Oh, and one more wild card country that I forgot to mention is Azerbaijan. And the only reason why I say that is because the war eclipse in 2020 on the summer solstice, which you can find in this 3-part series here, that God literally revealed a prophecy that war would break out on the Day of Atonement. And sure enough, a war broke out on the Day of Atonement between Azerbaijan, and Armenia. In fact, while we're on this slide, not only did the Day of Atonement War take place, but events tied to Iran and Turkey prior to those dates occurring. And even to that point, the 8/26/2020 relationship to Turkey was tied to Greece. And because Greece is a part of the EU, which Turkey now wants to join, that this tension may be the exact reason why there will be a falling out with Turkey. And so even this eclipse event is pointing to the significance of Turkey. However, with regards to Azerbaijan, what's fascinating is that they are friends with Turkey, but enemies of Iran. That's interesting, that all three of these countries would be tied to this eclipse. In fact, the tension between Azerbaijan and Iran is what drives the relationship between Israel and Azerbaijan. In fact, Azerbaijan is the only Shia majority country with an embassy in Israel. And that's just of recent too, by the way. But nonetheless, Azerbaijan may be tied up in some of these celestial events coming up in Leo. And so be on the lookout for all four of these countries as they're tied to these celestial events. And or the date that something significant tied to one of these countries is related to the number 11 or the number 6. In fact, we will see an 11 date connection by the end of the video. Well, now that we've discussed and established all of that, let's finish section 2 so that we can move into section 3, the main point of this video. So let's set it up. And so coming back to our repeating World War II signs, because as we have discovered, Hitler and Erdogan are both tied to 8/21 solar eclipses that occurred in the constellation of Leo. And so turning to this side, those two 8/21 eclipses, as we've discovered, are located here. And of course we know there's a third one tied to World War I, even dubbed the World War I eclipse. And so all 8/21 eclipses are tied to World War, and main point to the constellation of Leo. In addition to the fact that on the start date of World War I and World War II, Venus uniquely was in the constellation of Leo. Which is why, to finish out this pattern in the start of World War III, we're discussing July and October because that is when Venus is in Leo again. However, this is where it gets supernatural by design, because we're going to discuss Prigozhin and the events in Russia, Erdogan and his proposal for Sweden to join NATO, along with two more celestial events, and yet all four of these are tied to separate celestial events in the constellation of Leo outside of Venus being in Leo, and therefore proving that a war rapture is on the horizon, because we have multiple celestial events all coinciding with this constellation right here. And so let us now cover these four events in chronological order as they occur, with our first being Prigozhin, the chief leader of the Wagner Group. And now, to really fully appreciate this, Prigozhin and Wagner marched on Moscow on 6/23. And to fully appreciate why this is significant from a numerological perspective, is that this date is an 11 date, an exact connection with the 8/21 solar eclipses, as world events tied to dates that are connected to the number 11, like 9/11 for example, or 6/5 of 1967, the Six-Day War, the beginning of when Israel would recapture Jerusalem, and there are many others, are events that are steps towards the end times. And so right off the bat, the very date that this march on Moscow occurred matches that connection. And interestingly enough, this event occurred 3 days prior to Venus going into Leo. But as we keep our eyes focused on the constellation of Leo, 6/23 was unique in that the moon was in Leo on that exact day. So not only do we have an 11 date connection, but we also have the moon being tied to the constellation of Leo, which was only a 3-day window, the 22nd through the 24th. And so what does this mean? This event is setting up our July and October windows. Why? Because of the 11 date aspect of this event, which is a key indicator. 11 dates are key indicators. In addition, we also see the tie-in of Belarus through this Prigozhin event. Another drop in the bucket towards war. Now, let's move to Erdogan, as his proposal for Sweden to join NATO happened on July 10th, one day prior to our 7/11 NATO connection. And yet, celestially speaking, this is supernatural by design. If we turn to Stellarium, 7/10 was the exact day that Mars was in conjunction with Regulus. Isn't that fascinating? And here is what is even more supernatural by design. The Turkish parliament has to vote and approve Erdogan's decision for Sweden to join NATO. And guess what month they do that in? October. Saints, that's the exact same window of Venus being in Leo again. But anyways, keep Mars in the back of your mind. It'll be significant here in a moment. And let's move on to our third celestial event. And that is now when Mercury is in conjunction with Regulus, which lands on a very unique day, 7/28, marking the 109th anniversary of the start of World War I. Isn't that incredible? Just reiterating this connection and significance of the constellation of Leo. As the start date of World War I in 1914, Venus was in Leo. And here we have Mercury in near perfect conjunction with the king star, Regulus, of the constellation of Leo. Also, keep Mercury in the back of your mind. That too will be significant here in a moment. Now, let's discuss celestial sign number 4. In fact, very similar to our third example of something being tied to the anniversary of World War I, Venus, the main planet of this whole pattern. Let us check this out in Stellarium, as I've made this video for it. And so we'll begin with it going into Leo for its first time. Boom, that's the first window that Venus is in Leo, pulls back for its retrograde motion, stops its retrograde motion, and then heads back towards Leo. Okay, let's watch that one more time. Check this out. Except this time, we're going to stop on the date after it's done completing its retrograde motion and heads back towards Leo. And boom, Venus stops its retrograde motion and heads back towards Leo on 9/1, the anniversary of World War II. Isn't that crazy? That is profound, saints. And so therefore, we have two celestial relationships. The Mercury conjunction of Regulus on the start of World War I, and the end of Venus retrograde motion on the start of World War II. Even as we have the actual start dates of World War I and World War II marked with Venus being in Leo. That's profound, saints. God is pointing to a world war on the horizon. And so, pulling these 4 celestial events together and related to the constellation of Leo, we have the moon tied with Prigozhin. We have the Mars Regulus conjunction tied with Erdogan. We have the Mercury Regulus conjunction tied to the anniversary of the start of World War I. And then we have the Venus retrograde motion tied to the anniversary of World War II. And so we have 3 planets and the moon. We'll come back to the moon here in a second, but check out why these 3 planets are unique. Remember our Revelation 12 sign? Boom. Mercury, Mars, and Venus are the 3 planets of our Revelation 12 sign. Isn't that incredible, saints? In addition, Venus being in Leo is tied to war, as we've seen throughout several videos, which means that our Venus-Leo connection is tucked inside the Revelation 12 sign. Oh, we are on the way to the war rapture. And even expanding upon that the Revelation 12 sign is tied with Jupiter being in Virgo for 9 months, labor pains, birth pains, And when we turn to Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus tells us that nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, that's World War, saints, and it's tied to birth pains. Isn't that phenomenal? Imagine exactly what the Apostle Paul tells us about sudden destruction being tied to a woman in labor. It's all pointing towards war, saints, but for us, a war rapture. And so now when we add the Revelation 12 sign to our World War III hybrid eclipse slide, sorry, I know it's a little sloppy, but just check this out. 2017 was a huge signpost, converging in many different ways. Our Erdogan eclipse, our 821 war eclipse, and now our Revelation 12 sign. And that is just looking at the 3 planets part of our 4 celestial signs. But how about when we consider the moon aspect tied to 623 and 11 date? Well, I would contend, because it's tied to Prigozhin and Russia, that is tied to America's judgment via Russia. Our Daniel 7:4 and 7:5 connection. And why do I say that? Well, it turns out that the moon is the key detail for us. As we know, this is already tied to war and the war rapture. Did you know that each of the 7 visible celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets, are all tied to days of the week? Well, the moon is tied to Monday. Okay? Now, when we look at the crisscross total solar eclipse pattern, the X out over America, if we turn to this slide, America's final hour, it turns out that those 2 eclipses both land on Mondays. In fact, even the middle eclipse, that lands 1211 days in the middle, exactly. Also the middle of Hanukkah as well. The 12/14/2020 total solar eclipse was also on a Monday, which is one of the reasons why I believe that when America's judgment happens, it will occur on a Monday. Understandably, to not only have the crisscross total solar eclipse pattern, plus the exact middle total solar eclipse, for all 3 of them to land on Mondays, the statistical improbability for that to happen, God is pointing to something very significant and profound here. And moreover, our Prigozhin connection with Russia, and Belarus for that matter too, and America's soon judgment, and including the UK, is tied up with this. But when that goes down, I don't know. Because again, the war rapture will be tied to a Pearl Harbor type event, sudden destruction. But in conclusion, isn't it profound that these 4 celestial bodies, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, are all tied to escalation with either war or the anniversary dates of war? And that this can be traced back to the Revelation 12 sign. That is profound. Especially considering that the Revelation 12 sign is the 3rd celestial sign that God used to mark 2017 as a pivotal year. An exact celestial copy of the celestial signs before World War II. And the common connection between these 2 threads is the constellation of Leo. The very constellation that my rapture vision took place in. Saints, when we go home, that's the direction we're going. As Leo, being the pivotal constellation within our war theme and the Revelation 12 sign, the war rapture is close. And according to the Apostle Paul, while they're saying peace and safety, and then sudden destruction, therefore, if this upcoming SDG event, peace and safety, then we know what's coming next. I would contend it's not Daniel's 70th week covenant, but that is for another video. However, the peace and safety aspect of it is very relevant to this topic of God's celestial war patterns, and if anything, proves it. Even to that point, the Antichrist hybrid solar eclipse. And so, isn't it fascinating how God's celestial signs are in sync with world events? I think it's incredible. In fact, it's supernatural by design, which is where we're going to end today's video. And as always, please make sure to take all things before the Lord first, because I certainly can't have error. But who doesn't have error is God's Holy Spirit. He cannot tell a lie. So test and confirm all things through Him. He's your best friend, and He'll even tell you what is to come. And so with that said, beloved, I just want to thank you for watching. God bless. I love you. Jesus loves you. And He's coming very soon. Maranatha, King Jesus.